James is a painter and an artist. He has drawn ever since he was a child. But Harry is missing one sense that most of us take for granted. For this visual artist, there is no sound, because he's deaf. So much of the input from the world that he would normally get from his eyes and ears all has to be channeled through his eyes. For Harry, his eyes are his ears, and his hands are his mouth.
The reason I became an artist was because of my deafness. This came about because both of my parents are hearing, and my brothers and sisters are deaf, as I am, but with the exception that they have the ability to communicate by lip reading, while I couldn't lip read at all. There was no way I could communicate with my parents. So, one day, I drew a picture, and I showed it to my parents. And my parents said, "That's great," and gave me the praise, and that was my first compliment that I got from my parents. The most frustrating thing about being deaf is the telephone. Because every time you meet someone new, like a new friend that's a hearing person, and you're talking, and everything's going along pretty well, and they say, "Jeff, can I get your phone number?" And they say, "Okay, I'll see you later," but you never hear from them again because you don't have the phone. And also, it's exactly the same way in art. You make contact with the gallery, but you don't have a phone number, and then they forget about me. Again, with the doctor, everywhere you just run into frustration after frustration because the telephone has stolen that type of communication from me. So I'm alone in the world many of the times. I've never really felt lonely with things, but I do feel lonely when I'm around hearing people. When I try to express myself and my feelings, and I have to hold it back in, because I can't express it spontaneously, but there's less loneliness in my painting, because I can put in the painting the things that I would like to give to hearing people, and they can see my thoughts through my paintings. And maybe it won't make me so I'm so alone. Here you'll notice this is my biggest painting, and the reason this is biggest is because it represents the ear. This is my biggest influence on my life. So here it looks like the folds of the ear and how it all comes to the center there. It's beautiful. Down here, it's like someone who's just snipped it off, cut it off, severed it in a way, so you can't hear. So it just comes down to an abrupt end. All this, everything comes into it, but goes nowhere. It's like it's dead. Okay, I was fascinated with the Titanic because of its connection with deafness too. What kind of connection is it? Well, it happened that the ship hit the iceberg and was beginning to sink, and it was floundering, so they signaled for help, and they saw a boat about 20 miles, or knew there was a boat about 20 miles off, so they tried to telegraph to it. But the operator on the other end was off duty and asleep. And they couldn't get through, so they thought they would send up the signal flares. So they sent them up and they exploded in the air, and still nothing happened. So they sent it about 8 times, and the boat didn't see it, or he did see it, but he thought nothing of it. He ignored it. And then the Titanic went and sank. And I wondered about that. There was that other boat out there, so they decided to call him. Why wasn't there any communication? They didn't know that the Titanic had hit the iceberg and was sinking. And it's the same type of thing with deafness. People are continually asking for help, but we're being pushed aside, and we sink. And I object to that. We should be paying more attention to deaf people. I feel that I can communicate with objects and not people, because objects tend to have a lot of patience with me. And, for example, a cat. You can pet the cat, and people refuse to have that type of communication with me. They just take off. On the other hand, blind people are able to communicate with hearing people, but they can't communicate with objects. And things that I really like to focus on and look at more closely, like things in nature itself, the sunrise or the sunset, flowers, things like that that would be distracting with noise. Here I'm able to exclude the noise from my environment, just focus in on the object itself. And it just makes me totally fascinated with the beauty and the things I see that might have been overlooked before. I'm interested in the detail and the beauty of the objects and really get pleasure from what nature is. This is an example of a hearing shell. Now, why would that be? Because you can hear in there, like you can hear the sea, the waves of the ocean. Okay, now, this is a deaf shell. Why do I pick this one as a deaf shell and this one as a hearing shell? Because when I was a small boy, I saw a hearing boy pick up the shell, put it to his ear, and listen. And he said, I can hear something. So I looked at him and I thought, well, I want to try and be like that hearing guy. So I picked up this shell and listened. And the hearing guy just laughed at me. He said, you can't hear anything. I said, yeah, I can. And found out, no, there's no sound in there because of the shape. In the conch shell, there was the shape that gave it the sound. So I learned something then. So I decided then on in my paintings, as in this one, that I can imagine the sound of the water and the ripple effect. And the ripples here match the ripples in the water. So they go together. So this is a deaf shell. Oftentimes I'll make noise that I'm not aware of, like I'll be eating, and I'll make a lot of noise, and it's very unpleasing to hearing people. They say, stop that, you're making that noise. You sound disgusting. So I try and control it and bring it down a little bit, but it doesn't please me a whole lot. But do I have to please the hearing people or learn to please myself? Also, like the rain. If it's raining hard in the middle of the night, I know nothing about it. But my hearing friends are awake all night. Also along that same line, when I'm walking, sometimes I'll be walking like an elephant. And my friends will complain and say, stop, pick up your feet. Don't stomp down. So I have to walk lightly. But for a long time, I've been able to control it over the years. I'm not perfect yet, but of course, but you have to excuse me because I'm deaf, all right? It's interesting. When you talk about a wall, you can see that you have the wall there, but have a friend who happens to be hearing, and he says, I can hear there's an argument on the other side of the wall. And I say, really? And I wondered, he's really like Superman, because he can hear through the wall. But I can't see through the wall. I can't see what's back there. It's just there. It stops my vision. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And it's lucky that deaf people can't hear, so they are able to ignore it. But oftentimes I wonder if they could stand my noise through that wall. Like, I didn't know what a high or a low bass sound was or anything like that until I met a friend of mine. His name was Vladimir Horowitz. He's a famous pianist. And I met him in a restaurant. And the way I met him was that we were sitting in the restaurant looking around, and I saw him. And he had a nice affect to him. And then we started communicating after that. And he was very impressed because of my big smile. And he came over and wrote a note and gave it to me and said, I'd like to ask you to come and talk, because he himself is famous as a pianist. And I wondered who it was and if he had lost his hearing or something like that, and I was curious. And so we started asking questions, and then he found out that I was an artist and he was interested in that, and he invited me over to his home. And we started talking, and I asked him, could you play the piano for me? And he said, sure, I'd be happy to. He sat down and started playing, and then I realized that I couldn't hear the low notes or the high notes. Only the notes in the middle range I could hear. And then I was able to feel the low notes and the middle notes, but not the high notes. So he was playing the piano, and he decided to play only within the mid-range. And it was interesting to feel the differences in that range. It wasn't comfortable for him to stay within that small range on the keyboard, but I really enjoyed it. And it was something that I learned, and it has since influenced my art. Notice the circles, which are representing the sense of seeing and the eyes. Inside this one, we have jumbled up notes. This means I can hear the sound in the music, but I don't understand what it means. On the next one, you can see the wood grain. Actually, it's in both of them in the background. This shows that you can feel the vibration of the music through the wood. When I've got the TV on, or there's music or something that I'm not able to hear, I use the violin. That way I can feel the vibrations through the wood of the violin, and I can get the feel of the music through it. For example,
I'll tell you how to save it. A little more on my gas. Yeah. We don't want anything too extravagant. Whoa!
I'm able to feel the music, or feel through it.
Sam! No, that's it, baby.
I hear nothing, but I can feel the vibrations.
The white guy turns to me and says, burn, baby, burn, I leave.
You see, most of the time when you see songs, you don't see any dance. So my friend took me to go see a dancer, and she had the music with her, and I saw the dance, which I considered an art in itself. It was a belly dancer, and she had it with the music, and her body and her whole torso just went with the music and the rhythm, and with the finger symbols, and there was a lot to do with the vision in that. It's music, but it's visual music. And in art, I try and incorporate that movement. The same way hearing people hear music, so it's equal. So I have my own way of representing music. I've tried to paint or make another sound other than music itself. Here I've made the sound of crunching paper. To me, this is what it sounds like in a visual way. So, for example, you take the paper and crunch it up. This is what it sounds like, and this is what it looks like. And if you'll notice on this picture, we have the dark background instead of white. And the reason I used this was to make the colors even stronger and easier to notice. The colors are different than the regular colors I used. Also, as a deaf person, it's easier to focus on the rhythm of red, blue, yellow, red, blue, yellow, red, blue, yellow, red, red, blue, yellow, red, red, blue, yellow, and follow the rhythm all the way down. Sort of like disco dancing with all the flashing lights that are around in that place. And then if you look up in this area, you've got the wood. Again, this represents the feeling of vibrations through the floor, as well as visually seeing the chicken wire coming up. And then the ear is really can't hear everything. It's in a way trapped behind the wire. But I hope to see one day that become an eye seeing the music.
We survive is